Our keynote speaker is the Director of Employability in Nottingham Trent University in the UK, with 13 years of experience in higher education and over 14 years experience in management and leadership. He is an honorary fellow of the Institute for Enterprise and Entrepreneurs and senior fellow of the Higher Education Academy. He's currently leading a team of 10 academics with a focus on learning and teaching to enhance employability. He has recently completed his PhD with a focus on defining and developing more effective approaches to employability skills. Without further ado, please help me in welcoming Dr. Doug Cole. Dr. Doug, a very good morning to you.
Good morning. Thank you very much.
How are you doing today?
I'm very good. It's nice and early here in the UK. It's slightly more human time over there, I'm sure.
Right. Yeah, it's around 10 o'clock in the morning, and I believe we have more than 150 participants waiting for your very interesting and fruitful presentation. So before we start, Dr. Doug is going to give us a presentation titled Developing a Future-Facing Approach to Support Scalable Change in Higher Education Learning. Dr. Doug, you have 45 minutes. 30 minutes is going to be your presentation, and then we'll discuss any questions in the other 15 minutes. So I wish you all the best, and the floor is yours.
Many thanks for that very kind introduction. But if I share my screen with you all, if that's okay, I can share the slides that I've prepared. Okay, can you all see the slides? Anybody see the slides? I hope you can see the slides. I'm going to assume you can all see the slides. Well, good morning. Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. Delighted to be able to join you all this morning. Honoured to be invited. It's an absolute pleasure. I was actually in Bahrain in 2014, so I first met the great people over there back then, and it's really exciting to be able to connect again in this way this morning. So I've got 30 minutes, lots to get through, and lots to share with you all. So as I said, I'm the Deputy Director of Employability at Nottingham Trent University, and this morning I wanted to share a bit more about some of my research and some of my practice in terms of leading on this agenda and working with colleagues at Nottingham Trent in this space and across the UK and beyond. I wanted to explain a little bit more to begin with around context of the first few slides, just to kind of help highlight why is he saying these things? Why is he talking like this? What's he thinking? Where's this coming from? And I think that's really helpful to share, so you better understand kind of the points I'm trying to make. I will deliberately try to provoke and get you thinking, and get you reflecting on your current practice, what your institution is doing. So, you know, I'm coming from, I suppose, having many different lenses and perspectives in terms of this agenda. So as a former employer, spending half my career in industry, in the sports and leisure industry, and working in several countries, including across Asia, then working as an academic and being an academic, I still have to kind of check that. I've obviously just finished my PhD recently, working in professional services in the university. And until recently, as I said, I was a student. So I'm looking at employability and learning through these many different lenses. And I think that's an interesting perspective to have. I'm particularly interested in research to practice. How do we bring the research and connect it to what we're doing? Not just practice, but strategy and policy and how we do things at scale. For me, language is crucial in all of this, and I'm passionate about the language that we speak in this regard. And you'll hear this as a recurring theme throughout my presentation and my slides. And whilst I'm not an expert on teaching the English language, I am fascinated by the way we think and speak about employability and learning to support employability. And I would challenge that all of you to kind of to reflect on the language you use, and reflect even on the language that's being used today throughout the conference, and perhaps think about alternative words we might be using, which in terms of developing lifelong learners might be more productive. I'm interested in scalable and strategic approaches to employability. Obviously, there's fantastic practice going on out there. We know that. But my question is that practice available for all students, across all courses and all programs? And there's very little research around scalable and strategic approaches to employability. And this is a space I've spent the last 10 years of my career focused on working in and bringing research to practice and applying that learning things that have been around for a long time in other spaces, not just in employability, and trying to kind of bring the benefit of that for learners across the range. So obviously, I said I'm interested in work that at scale. So again, not just at a program or the course level, but at the institutional level and at strategic level. I'm very fortunate to be part of a fantastic team at Nottingham Trent University. Just to give you an idea of who we are and where I'm coming from. So we have a team of over 120 staff in employability at Nottingham Trent University. And I particularly lead a team of academics, full-time academics who are based in each of the schools, who have very much a focus on looking at curriculum and how employability is delivered through learning and teaching and assessment, but also with this view around life-wide learning and how we better embrace that as a concept, and scholarship and how we promote and engage that of employability learning from colleagues across the institution. So what's all this about? So I really love this picture. I came across this a few years ago, and it's from the work of Professor Norman Jackson, and it just really kind of encapsulates where are we coming from with all this work? What's this all about? Why are we here? What are we trying to achieve? And actually, this was a picture that Professor Norman Jackson and his colleagues were working at the Centre of Excellence for Learning and Teaching at the University of Surrey at the time, and they were asked the question, why are you here? What's your purpose? And this is how they wrapped it up. They talked about learning for a complex world. Isn't that fascinating? Looking at the date there, 2008, absolutely couldn't be more relevant today, 12 years on, learning for a complex and ever-changing world. So and what really resonated with me with this picture was the language, was the words on it. And I've, you know, the dominant language, the dominant narrative in this space, in the UK, from the government, from the media and globally, is skills. And I want to challenge that. I want to really push back and get us to think about this, because we know it's not just skills that it takes to be successful. And if you look at the words down on the side of the picture there, you've got ethics, morals, beliefs, values, attitude. These are the kinds of words and language we should be making explicit with our students. Let's not leave them implicit for any longer. We need to unpack this, and it really this is part of creating and nurturing and developing lifelong learners. We have a responsibility to tell them these are the kinds of things that are important, and not just your skills and your knowledge. We have to move beyond that narrative. We have to, I said, and again, the top words there, unknown, uncertainty. It's a mess right now. We need to be prepared. We need people who are flexible and agile. And this certainly resonated through a lot of the comments that were made by the panelists in yesterday's opening session as well, about what industry was looking for and what was required of those of us working in education, and how we prepare people for the future more effectively. Isn't that interesting, again, in the center there, that if we start talking about these areas of learning in a different way, that actually the benefits go beyond the notion of just securing a job, but also we're moving into a space which is supporting well-being and mental health. And these are obviously also critical agendas right now across the globe. So I believe we're in a situation right now that we need to challenge, and we need to push back that education plus skills equals job and success. It's too linear. It's too simplistic. It hides all the nuances of what really matters. We need to be diversifying that language, what we're saying, what's in the policy, and why this is important is because to develop skills will do one thing. To nurture attitude, character, behavior, we need to do something else. And to engage people at scale, skills is not a word that engages academic community. It's a word that they don't necessarily believe that they're there to support. It's critical thinking, independent thought, all these other words. And so it's really important that we, like I said, wrap this and position this in a slightly different way. And my question here is, are we preparing people for a job, or are we preparing people for life more broadly? And actually, job is part of life. We're not here just to work. You know, I'm dug at home, at work, with my friends, with my family, with my colleagues. There are many dimensions to life. And isn't that what higher education and education is about, preparing people for life? And job is one part of that. I'm not taking away the importance of us preparing people for a job. We need to, but if we just open up the dialogue a bit more broadly, I believe we can engage more people in this task and this challenge that we're facing. But I wanted to share with you a few snippets of my findings of my PhD, actually. And this was research I've been conducting over the last few years. And so this was from 2 institutions in particular. But what it just really summarized for me is how we're thinking about employability and what it is we're trying to achieve, our understanding of it, our interpretations, and the language that we use. And what it demonstrates for me is that there isn't this research-informed view, that people's understanding of employability and what really matters to our students in the classroom is not informed by what's been written 10, 12 years ago and is really valuable. It's being informed by common sense or the media or what the government says. And that's something we need to kind of get back under the skin of and unpack and explore a little bit more deeply. And isn't it interesting, this on the top right one there, where we talk about, isn't a degree about more than employability? This person viewing it, because their understanding is employability equals job, they see it as about more than that. I see it as about more than that. Those of us who are involved in the research and scholarship around this space, we understand it. It's not just about job, it's about who we are as people. This isn't just about what we know and what we can do. It's about who we are. And we need a combination. We need all of these areas of learning if we want to be successful moving forward. So there's a real disconnect there that I observed through my research. And I think that's really important. So this next slide just summarizes those findings and actually kind of exploring what is it that actually influences this thinking at the top there. So it is, people did, highlight how it was the league tables, the metrics. The metrics have take a lot of responsibility here. The league tables that position one university against another when they're all completely different, and all the subjects and the context and the cultures are all very different, yet somehow they're all put in the league tables. It's like putting every single football team in the Premier League. You can't compare everything through numbers. It has to be a more quality, looking at the quality of things, and numbers can't measure everything. And we've become obsessed globally about that. And that's influencing people's thinking, it's influencing policy, it's influencing strategy, and it's influencing practice. It's influencing what we're doing with our students. Newspapers are influencing what we're doing with our students. How is that a good thing? We need to be thinking about this critically. And so from the sample that I looking at a policy level and looking at strategy level, looking at what leaders in these institutions thought, looking at what academics and the students thought, the strong themes were coming out. What does employability mean to you? The first words out of their mouths: skill, job. That was it. And I asked that question, and you can test it yourselves when you go back to your work with your colleagues. Ask the question, and I bet you those are some of the first words that come out. And often there's very little more coming until you ask more and you ask further questions and you start to unpack it. And I would argue this is a very narrow interpretation of what it is we should be trying to achieve through our curriculum and our courses. We have to diversify that narrative, because how it's currently positioned is it's disconnected. It's disconnected from the models and in the literature that have been published, the definitions of employability that have been published, and it's disconnected often from the core purpose of a university in terms of learning and teaching. It's almost, that's the job of the careers team. That's the job of the employability team. That's not my job. It's everybody's job. But that understanding and the language we're using is causing these disconnects and this separation, and we need to challenge that. So this is the work that I've been trying to, I suppose, taking this research, taking this, what I've learned, and trying to apply this in practice to the various institutions and places that I've worked. So, and I argue that there's a need to reposition this agenda now, to talk about it in terms of learning. This is all about learning and teaching, but learning in a particular context. And this slide just highlights the work that I've been doing, and it's a number of models of employability that have been published over the years, going back as far as 2007, the top one there on the right. So it's Dacre, Paul and Saul, the Career Edge model, which highlights the areas that they believe are important to support employability. You've got the Graduate Capital model by Tomlinson at the bottom there, and you've got the Psychosocial model by Fugate et al. So these are just a few examples. So they're not hundreds of models, but these are just a few examples how employability has been defined in the literature. And if you'll notice in each of those individual models on the right side there, skills is only one part of it. But to take the top one in particular, Career Edge model, generic skills is one part of it. And those authors are arguing that every part is equally important. And equally in those other models, all those aspects are important. The word skills isn't used in the Tomlinson model. And I think that's something to embrace, that this is just a small part of the picture. And what I've tried to do is, so through this is one of the outputs of my PhD, was this taxonomy called Dimensions for Learning, which I developed as a result of my PhD, where I tried to reposition the language and really talk about this in terms of what kind of learning do we need? What's the combination of areas of learning that are crucial to support our students here? And I think that's what's really important. And I would argue that all of these areas of learning are equally important. So moving forward, now I've been with Nottingham Trent University for 2 years, and I wanted to apply this research and practice to Nottingham Trent specifically, taking into context. It's not a one-size-fits-all. I'm interested in developing things that can be applied in practice, and so context for me is really important. Frameworks and models, as you see, I'm a particular fan of frameworks and models and providing that structure. And obviously, one of the themes of the conference today, in terms of life-wide learning, I wanted to share this work by Norman Jackson again, who's actually a good friend of mine. I've been working with Norman on this work now for about a year or so, trying to support and raise awareness of this work that was conducted 12 years ago for learning and teaching, but how it now has relevance even more so today for employability. The life-wide learning is about learning that's happening simultaneously across multiple spaces in our life, and how we help students and learners harness and become more aware of the benefits and the value of that learning across all those spaces. Let's face it, the students today are not all in the classroom. And so they're learning through all these different experiences, but we need to harness that. So reflective practice becomes even more crucial than it's ever been before. And I'll say a little bit more about that later. So lifelong learning, we're all fairly familiar with that term, but this notion of life-wide learning has been written about, and I think it's something that we need to embrace, because it means that we don't have to pull out curriculum content. It's not all on the curriculum. This is about providing a structure and supporting learners to understand the value of their learning across other spaces in their life. So this leads me to the work that I developed at Nottingham Trent University with colleagues. And this is what we're kind of terming a new taxonomy called employability redefined. It's a short video. I'm just going to play it for you now. There's no audio, but I will speak a little bit over it. So we wanted to kind of conceptualize employability in a slightly different way. We wanted to kind of highlight that this is about a combination of areas, not just skills. There's several things we need to be thinking about here. And each of these areas of learning, we would argue, is crucial in combination at the course level. So every student having access to learning in all of these spaces. So it's constructive alignment. It's thinking, what are we trying to develop first? What learning goes into each of these areas? This is deliberately black and white picture so that people can color and bring this to life. And much of this is common sense. Much of this is already in place, and you'll recognize and it'll be familiar to you. But there's some other areas we need to question, and what are we doing to support the development of identity, professional identity, career identity? How are we supporting students in that space? Interpersonal and intrapersonal learning. What are we doing in those regards? So this collectively creates scaffolding with reflective practice underpinning all of it. And so the idea is that it's this cohesive whole, this more inclusive and integrated view of what it is we're trying to achieve. And it's just presented in a slightly different way than it has been done before. So what we wanted is creating scaffolding, if you like. These elements are all informed by research. So they align to the models of employability. They've been informed by work in learning and teaching and pedagogy and in those spaces. But what it does is then, so how do we then translate that to practice? It creates scaffolding as a tool, if you like, as a framework for curriculum design. So course teams can at that level consider what is it that's important to us as a course with our expertise in a particular space. What's important to us? What do we need to put in those areas? So there's flexibility built into it. It's not a restrictive one size fits all, and we have to move away from that notion. All students will possess these 8 graduate attributes. Why? We're not producing robots. These are human beings. Why can't we define that in context much more? Why can't course teams own that process? Because if we want to do this at scale, across a university, we need all those course teams to be on board and engaged in this process. So giving them a restrictive one-size-fits-all is not going to win hearts and minds. We need to create these parameters, these principles. This approach is about principles that support a strategic approach that can be applied in practice across every course. So this isn't subject, this can be applied across every course, across an institution. I've been testing many of these principles over the last 10 years. And this is the culmination of that work and presented now in a slightly different and I think more interesting way. Obviously, right now, resilience and self-efficacy, particularly important. It's a difficult time for everyone. Lots of competition. The world is changing. The employment world is changing. If we haven't got resilience and self-efficacy in our students, it's going to be difficult. And that was raised yesterday actually in relation to some of the gender differences there in the Gulf. And in terms of females and supporting females, that self-efficacy, that can-do attitude, that self-belief is so important. But we're arguing here that all of these areas are important. And again, you'll notice the word job doesn't appear. The word skills doesn't appear. The word careers doesn't appear. We're trying to reframe this in a language that can engage en masse, that can engage other people, because they can start to connect and recognize, because often much of this practice is already there, but it's implicit and it's hidden. And we're trying to help them uncover the good that's already there, the value that's already there, that's often already happening. It's just not spoken about. The problem is with that is the students don't then recognize it. They don't recognize the value of what they're getting. It's like my son is 14 years old. I asked, how was school today? He was all right. What'd you do? Nothing. He's a good student, yet his ability to reflect and go into that depth is limited. And we need to support all our learners in that space, how we really help them understand the value of their learning across all these spaces. So I believe this is a really exciting opportunity to kind of to take stock, to stop and reflect and think about how we talk about employability and what we do in practice to address it. So what we've done here is we've developed this scaffolding to support the curriculum design process, which also harnesses and embraces the notion of life-wide learning and also creates an opportunity for scalable change across a whole institution. So we're supporting this through a strategic approach. And what we're doing here through this way is we're addressing consistency. And I would argue that consistency is a challenge for every institution in the world. That there's always going to be excellent practice, but there's also going to be good practice, and there's also going to be practice that needs to be developed and enhanced. And how do we enhance our work and raise standards across the board, across all courses? That's what I'm interested in, and that's where there's been very little work and research undertaken up to date, and that's why I spent the last 10 years of my career specializing in this space. There's flexibility inbuilt in this process, or this methodology. It's a methodology of sorts that you could apply to your institutions, not just for your English language courses, but could be applied across an institution, because it's not so tightly defined that we're telling you exactly what you have to do and how you have to do it. We're also keeping it relatively simple. A lot of the models that I showed you, and I know there were some presentations yesterday where when these structures and scaffolding are presented, competencies for the institution, etc. But when you come down to it, they might break down to 30 or 40 different areas. No course team and no academic is going to thank you for asking them to map their course to 30 or 40 different areas. And if they do, it's going to become a tick box exercise that's not meaningful, that doesn't really have that quality and truth behind it. It's just a tick, yes, I'm doing that, I'm doing that. It's not how we need to go. So we've deliberately kept this relatively simple in some ways, but allowing that flexibility for it to be developed over time. Ownership at the local level. So it has this research informed kind of grounding behind it. It's an integrated approach that brings together learning from across many different spaces. I would argue it's more comprehensive than much of the narrative and the discourse that's happening. I would have to say this is new. We are literally planning to test this now. We've only developed this model in the last 12 months. So this is a new approach. So this isn't what we're doing right now. This is the future. So we already have a strong grounding in how we approach employability across all courses at Nottingham Trent University, with mandatory elements in the curriculum of particular areas that are of learning that are crucial. This is the future. So what I'm talking about with this taxonomy is about the future, and so testing this and looking at what we can learn over the next couple of years. I would argue when you distill this work down to this level, when you talk about self-efficacy and resilience, you talk about interpersonal and intrapersonal learning and identity, you're also supporting student retention, student experience, student attainment, student progression, mental health, well-being. It's not just about job. By distilling it down to this more granular level, you start to see the value that you're bringing to multiple agendas. This has to be a smarter way of working. With limited resources, with limited human and financial resources, we can't keep operating in silos and separating things out. That's your job. This is your job. We need to bring things together. And through looking at it in this way, we create that opportunity and that scaffolding. And I'll say a little bit more about this that can be shared. And this is about a future-facing approach. This is about supporting learners for life in a complex world that's ever changing. And I think all of these areas are crucial that we need to consider in our curriculum design and in our strategy and our policies and our processes moving forwards for the future. So finally, just a slide to kind of share a little bit about what we're planning to do. So as I said, we're planning to embed and test the taxonomy over the next 18 to 24 months at Nottingham Trent University, particularly as a tool for curriculum design to support that at the course level. And we're going to have pilots running in each of our 9 schools, including Institute of Education as well. So we're going to be working with course teams, students, employers, to really embed this in practice over the next 2 years. And we're going to then develop case studies looking at what's been the impact and the value of that work. How has that worked? But what's also interesting is through the conversations I've been having, is there's also an opportunity to test this taxonomy in a range of other contexts. And that's what's been really interesting. When I talked about how it can support multiple agendas just a moment ago, so I've been talking to our human resources, our organizational development colleagues, who are looking to apply and use the taxonomy as a framework for their thinking for our scheme. I'm talking to our colleagues in the enterprise team about how we can look at the synergies between enterprise and employability more effectively. We're talking to colleagues in a further education college. So looking at the different levels of education, I would argue that that structure could be engineered across all levels of education. So what might that look like in a further education college too? I'm also, so we're talking to a range of different partners. Our students' union are also using it as a structure for reflective portfolio for some of their school representatives and how they structure their reflections for their own personal and career development. So what's been really exciting is how we've been able to kind of engage with teams across the institution, working in different spaces, all through the same taxonomy. And that's the particularly exciting thing for me. So I plan to write up this work as a journal article. It's published in my PhD, some of this work, the underpinnings, the principles behind it. But I plan to write up a journal article over the coming year. And obviously there'll be case studies and other work that we'll be publishing. So our work is very much going to be focused, continuing to encourage scholarship, sharing, networking. We're interested in, talking to people around the world, around these challenges and building partnerships with like-minded organizations. And I think we need to do that now, particularly now in the world that we're living in. We need to learn from each other. None of us have all the answers. We don't know what works for employability. There is no research there's research that shows a correlation between placements and employment. And let's be clear, those league tables are employment league tables, not employability league tables. There is no exact measure of employability, although there's some trying to be developed. I know there's some fantastic work in Australia that's just emerging. But those tables that we see are employment measures. And I think we need to be thinking much more smart and broadly than that. Obviously, I said this was research informed, so I have to kind of do the academic thing and share, this is informed by a whole series of research across multiple spaces. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that this thinking is not just me. This is building on the thoughts of many other people that have come before me. But thank you very much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Dr. Cole, thank you very much for a very fruitful and very realistic presentation. Okay, for a very realistic presentation of today. Just a reminder, Dr. Cole was talking about developing a future-facing approach to support scalable change in higher education learning. Dr. Cole, I've got a couple of questions here that I would like to address. We've got a question from Dr. Tamim Ansari. The question says, do you agree that the kind of attention that we give to micro aspects of the learning process results in complicating the learning process? Do you also agree that the intensive focus takes away the natural instincts of learning? The floor is yours, Dr. Cole.
Okay, thank you. It's interesting that I believe we need to look at these in more detail, because I think some of these things are missing. I think that's the problem. If these things were there anyway, I think there's less of a need to use that microscope and get into those minute details, and to kind of, perhaps I said, break up that natural flow. Perhaps 20, 30 years ago, maybe those things were there. They were present. I would argue that the obsession with metrics and numbers and results has driven some of that out. And I think the focus needs to go back on those things that have always been part of good education, but I think that have been missing. And I think often, like I said, my experience is the detail of these things is often missing. It's implicit. It's not being spoken about. And learners don't recognize it. And I think we need to unpack and talk about it. Otherwise, the learners don't recognize it. This is not new pedagogical theory. This is based on constructive alignment principles that have been around for a long time. What are the learning outcomes we want to achieve? So if any of us are developing a module for a particular course of study, we often will start with the learning outcomes. What do we want the students to be able to know and achieve, or to be able to understand and do by the end of the course? That's where I'm saying we need to think about what we're putting in there. Is it just what do students need to know? Is it just what they need to do? Or is it technically for a particular profession? Or is this actually also about who they are as people, and how do we weave that into our learning outcomes and objectives? So I'm talking about, this is an extra. I'm trying to talk about this as in terms of integrating it and weaving it and unpack. I think a lot of it's there. I just think it's about making it more explicit. And I think we have to, because I don't think learners are recognizing the real value of what they're getting right now.
Right, thank you very much. We do have other couple of questions. I have another question from the same person, Dr. Tamim Ansari. Do we need to design the curriculum to fit into the context wherein we are placed, or do we need to prepare the students to fit into the curriculum that we have designed from our assumed understanding of reality? The floor is yours, Dr. Cole.
Wow, that's an interesting question. Yeah. Could you just repeat that again, just so I fully understand? Remember, it's early here, so give me it again, please.
The question again, do we need to design the curriculum to fit into the context wherein we are placed, or do we need to prepare the students to fit into the curriculum that we have designed from our assumed understanding of reality? And I think that he means about the shifting or changes that are happening, which have affected the curriculum and the context of learning. Yeah.
I would argue that those are both inextricably linked, that you can't separate the two. I think your context surely is your reality. I don't think there's any assumption here. I think we need to talk to other people and establish what the current reality is. I don't think we can afford to have this, we need to be talking to industry, different organizations externally. But we've been doing that for a long time, and there's a lot of research out there that already tells us what learners need for the future, and it hasn't radically changed. Yes, digital is always going to evolve. Skills, technical skills are always going to evolve, but attitude and behavior and values and character have always been important. They're just not spoken about anymore. And I think I think this process needs to be owned and shaped in context by those specialists in that given area. But like I said, I see those as being, I don't see those as separate. I see those as absolutely needing to be linked. We need to do both.
Right. We do have another question, and the question is from Donna Bernadette. Will artificial intelligence be an obstacle or a challenge to what you have all mentioned? This is just a thought troubling me. So it seems that people are really troubled nowadays because of the redefining the word employability and teaching and learning.
So the whole issue of artificial intelligence is an interesting one. We need to keep up to date with technology and how the world is changing and how we interface with those platforms and how we use them. But it's interesting because the CIPD, which is the national body for human resources in the UK, they've been running a campaign for a number of years now called "The Future of Work is Human," and they would argue that there are human qualities that machines and AI can't replicate in quite the same way, and they're arguing that we need to develop people and those personal qualities that I've been talking about that have been identified in the research. These are industry people saying the same thing, that the future of work actually is human. We need to capitalize on those strengths. What can't be replicated by machines, by AI? What's unique about us? And I think we need to also sharpen our focus on those areas and to bring that out. Yes, things, automation, certain technical skills and will be replaced over time. But I think that there's a real need to not lose sight of the fact of machines can never totally replace us as human beings, and we need to embrace and engage those particular facets that make us unique.
Totally agree. Another question we have from Lisa: which one should come first, understanding the learner's needs to fit the curriculum, or designing the curriculum according to the standard of the needs of the society, especially that we are on the 21st century?
Oh goodness, these are lots of difficult questions from people so early in the morning. I think, again, I would argue that there's a need for both. Again, I think we need to understand learners' needs in terms of the delivery and the pedagogies and how it's delivered. And obviously right now, where you're not necessarily face-to-face, that you're delivered online, there's obviously that suits some people, but it doesn't suit everybody. And some people don't have access to the internet.
Yes.
Some people don't necessarily, it's quite difficult for them right now. So I think we're limited in some ways, aren't we, in terms of our capacity to engage people who are learning different ways and different styles. But I think technology, hopefully, that's where AI may be of value, and bringing in new pedagogies and ways of engaging people in different ways. Obviously, for example, simulation, being able, if we can't get people out in the workplace, is there much more we can do in the simulation space? But I think we also we know what we need to develop in these learners. So I think understanding their needs is crucial to get that connection with them at that point. But I think that we know what's needed here. That the research tells us what they need to know. And I think that, again, it's about that, how do you merge and bring those two areas together? You don't know what you don't know. And I think we can't, we have to cater and engage and nurture and support these learners, but at the same time, we know what's important, we know what we should be valuing, and we need to be helping them engage with that in the many ways that we will have to try and apply that moving forward in the future.
Yes. This time I do have a question. You mentioned a very interesting word or term throughout your presentation, which is life-wide learning. Yeah. Actually, this is the first time I have ever come across such a terminology, which means learning and personal development through coming face-to-face to the current challenges, which leads to redefining employability skills, which is being disconnected from all the literature and the model that we have ever known. So what we are doing, we are taking the term employability on its own in disconnection from all the models and the literature that we have already known. Do you believe that this awareness has been spreading a long time ago, or is it just starting with the COVID-19? And what needs to be done further so that the awareness would be there, especially in the higher education, to deal with employability in a very different and up-to-date terms?
I think we all have that responsibility to perhaps go away from today. And I talked about language a lot, didn't I? And I think if we all go away and talk about this differently with our colleagues, we can impact social constructivism. Is how do we support that learning and develop learning across our communities with our colleagues? So I think we can all make a start. We can raise awareness of these concepts. So I said life-wide learning has been around since 2008, but it was in the learning and teaching and pedagogy space. So here are people specializing in employability or English language. We can't be experts in everything. So we don't necessarily, you can't read everything, but there are there are opportunities here to join up the dots. And I think this notion of learning across multiple spaces in our life has always been important, but it's even more important now because we're not just, it's not so heavily focused necessarily on the physical in the classroom delivery because we can't be there. But there, and I think that is interesting, is helping individuals understand the value of this learning that's already happening in multiple spaces in their life: family, volunteering, sport, societies, life in general, being a carer, all of these part-time work, learning that's happening in all these spaces. And how does that add to the curriculum? How does that add to the value of the curriculum? What is that teaching us? If you think about personal identity or interpersonal, intrapersonal learning or resilience or self-efficacy,
yes,
all of those other spaces support that. And so that's happening now, even during COVID. These, you know, let's face it, we all have to be resilient right now. That's not coming through the classroom. That's coming through living in a world that's very difficult. How do we keep going? How do we keep, you know, making sure we're moving forwards? And I think that, so I think the life-wide learning concept is really interesting because it puts it in an academic world. It's a concept that's been written about, that's been published. And actually, those authors, Norman Jackson and Ron Barnett, have recently written about ecosystems of learning as well, and how it's about harnessing all these things that are happening in our lives. And they were already important, they're even more important now. And I'm saying that I'm challenging us to kind of rethink our employability language. I'm asking us to not talk about employability skills. I'm asking us to just say, just drop that word out. Just say employability or just say learning. And it's, the sentences still work. We don't need to necessarily, just like I said, narrow the focus. Because if I've got a classroom full of students and I deliver some of these messages, those students will leave the classroom thinking, I just need to develop my skills. That's all I need to do. And they'll go on Google and they'll get teamwork and communication and leadership. And then what else? There are other things here. So I think it's about unpacking all of that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cole. I actually believe that we are still receiving lots of questions here, but because we have a time limit, so I believe the committee is going to send or forward you the questions, and I hope that everybody is going to be more satisfied and happy. So I would like to thank you very much. Do you have any last word that you would like to add or say before we conclude this session?
No, I just want to say a huge thank you to everybody. And I did, on my slides, I included my email, my Twitter, my LinkedIn. So please do reach out to me. Let's have a conversation. Let's talk. I'm absolutely happy to continue the conversation beyond today. So thank you again.
Good. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Cole, it's been an honor to have you today. Thank you very much and have a lovely day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.